How you doing today, Chris?
Good to see you, JM.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. Today we're going to be talking about AI, but for professionals. Over the past, I'd say 10 years, I've been working extremely closely with organizations on how they automate core tasks. And over the last 3 to 4 years, AI has been, I'd say, all the rage, all the hype, and ultimately providing core solutions. So today we're going to be talking about AI in accounting and audit and tax and consulting. And so one cool thing is Chris and I went to business school together at Berkeley. So, we go way back. Don't want to get into the date I graduated, but let's just say it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
But great, man. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, Chris?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I was excited to get the call and the invite. It's funny how our paths after business school have converged back to the world of accounting and professional services. So a little bit about me. So, we met in business school a decade ago, a little bit before business school. So I unfortunately graduated into the last financial crisis. So 2009, I'm seeing all these headlines these days about people graduating into an uncertain market around AI. And it gives me a little bit of PTSD back to the days of 2009 graduation. So I think at that point, plans kind of A and B went out the window. So I took a flyer and taught in the Dominican Republic as a teacher, math, science, and economics teacher at a bilingual school. Awesome experience. And made my way back to the States, started a professional career, got into software business development and partnership. So I was working with 50, 100 person companies that were in the $20, $30 million range that were looking to scale and grow. And then obviously I got to that decision point where you and I met in business school, and I was, just looking for a broader skill set. Always had a interest in numbers and math and data, and wanted more than just business development and partnership. So that brought us together at business school. After business school, I spent 3 years and change at McKinsey and Company in the San Francisco office. So working with, clients on their most pressing business challenges. So did a lot of the intersection of financial technology and payments, which is some of the experience I had before business school. A lot of my focus there was on go-to-market strategy. How do we grow the top line? Got into things like sales org effectiveness, sales enablement. Did a few, random due diligences as you do in consulting. But broadly cut my teeth in that environment, learned a ton, but, wanted to get back into an operator role. So lo and behold, made my way back to the East Coast to work at Epic Games, finance strategy, ultimately got into kind of a business operations role on the Unreal Engine side of the business. So Fortnite is the thing everyone knows about Epic Games, but they have a really powerful game development and real-time 3D rendering software. So really helping that organization think about go-to-market strategy. What are the customers we're going after? What's the value proposition? And this was about 3 years ago. The gaming market took a turn south, and Epic laid off, I think, close to 900 people. Side note, they just laid off another 1,000 people last week. So the trend continues, and, got pushed out of the nest, so to say, at that point. And around that time, 3 years ago, I got reached out to by a recruiter. He said, "Hey, we're building this thing called Ascend." Told me a little bit more about it. I think my initial reaction was, accounting? Like, what? I not on my bingo card in terms of my career. So I took the call, and, I got more and more interested in terms of what they were building. They were backed by a people first private equity firm called Alpine Investors. I had heard about Alpine before and had a good, really stellar reputation. So ended up getting excited about the role, stepping into what's called like an operating executive role at one of the firms that Ascend had partnered with, and have been doing that for the past 2 years. So really been, in the trenches of regional accounting firm transformation. It's been an awesome experience, and excited to talk more about pulling some of those threads here today with you.
No, fantastic, man. I remember back in 2015, when we started business school, just a completely different environment, man. Like, then it was big on self-driving cars. It was the beginnings of crypto,
Yeah.
and now it's a huge change into this world of AI. So a little bit about me for the audience, and I know Chris, you already know all of this. Is I started off my career as a Navy JAG, so a lawyer in the Navy. And my first job was being a defense attorney. So, keeping sailors and seamen and, everyone pretty much out of jail.
Yeah.
And so that was, I would say, a full-time job. Then I shifted over to being general counsel of Naval Nuclear Power Training Command. And that was a space I started having, I guess, a new itch, which was, man, what about business?
Yeah.
And so really started reading up, was thinking I would go into investment banking. And I was like, absolutely not. After learning a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah.
And then eventually I ended up landing at Accenture Strategy after the Navy. And so at Accenture Strategy, I was focused on procurement consulting, which was how organizations buy things, and specifically within pharma. And that's when I accidentally got on a project where they were trying to use one of the large incumbents. I'll leave them unnamed here.
Sure.
And this was for document automation. And so incidentally, I went on Google searching for document automation software and bumped into Templafy. So their SEO was solid, I would say. And so in that process, emailed the CEO, was like, hey, I can come help you. And eventually they asked me the magic question, can you sell? And I was like, yeah, I can sell. I hadn't sold much at all at that point. But really when I started at Templafy, I found a love for sales, a love for helping organizations solve their business problems. And my skill sets as a consultant, a lawyer, really came in handy in this consultative sales process that we were running, especially for the clients that we had. I ended up building our initial, I'd say, strategic accounts, which had a deep focus into the large audit firms. So think Deloitte, KPMG, EY, PwC, BDO, and helping them eliminate manual document work. A little bit about what we do today is we work with, I'd say, 8 out of 10 of the top firms. We're helping with 2 key things. I think one is around how do you get general productivity by eliminating, I'd call the drudgery of content creation, right? Which is how do you leverage a prompt to create a presentation? How do you leverage a prompt in order to create a document, especially in cases where it has to be right? There isn't a lot of room for 80%, 90%, 95%. You completely understand. It has to be correct. And so we're solely focused on what we would call prompted presentation for professionals. Now, that gives general productivity, but one of the key areas we've been deeply focused on is how do you automate that core content, right? If we're talking about audit reports, like how do you use AI for that? Because there's a lot of concerns around accuracy. And we've figured out a way to deliver those core results and reducing the likelihood of hallucination and giving correct output. So in building out that business unit and eventually getting a chief sales officer, just have learned a lot about accounting, audit, consulting. And it's a space where we're seeing a lot of AI development, a lot of money going into. So definitely been a great journey at Templafy. And part of the reason we're having the conversation today, I would love to hear more about what you've been doing at Ascend.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I distinctly remember when you were taking the jump to Templafy, and I thought it was really cool how you proactively found that opportunity. And obviously it's been a great journey for you since. So accounting, again, not something I ever probably had on my bingo card career wise. And here I am now. And so maybe to just frame up the conversation a little bit, like you've been talking about big 4 accounting firms, right? So I think those are the household names. They're servicing, 98, 100% of the Fortune 500 doing their audits. Like these are large, complex organizations that are servicing clients that have complex global needs. And that's a big part of the market. It's a really important part of the market. And what I've learned kind of in my experience over the past 2 years is that the accounting market, and let's focus for now on the US, right? North America for the purpose of the conversation, but it's massive and it's much more than those big 4, right? So outside of the big 4, you've got the next tier, which is some of what you alluded to, right? Let's call them the nationals or the regionals. It's the BDOs, the RSMs, the CBIZs. These are large organizations that service a mix of clients. They might be working with like larger middle market customers. They might be working with some larger publics. And those are typically, $1 billion+ of revenue, large offerings, have offices all over the country. And then you kind of get down into further down in the top 100, and you have firms that are anywhere from, 100 million to 500 million. And then you get further down and you have this like massive long tail of firms, right? So at the very, very long end, you have mom and pop shops where they're doing people's tax returns in their community, right? And they have a really seasonal business. They work really hard around the tax deadlines. We're right around that time of the year right now. I think that I saw an estimate somewhere, it's upwards of 90,000 accounting firms. Many of those are, small sole proprietors or a few people type shops. So it's a super fragmented market overall, right? And in terms of Ascend, so Ascend is really, our goal was to bring an independence model to the middle market, right? So the middle market being these, 30, 40, $50 million firms, what we saw was there was just like a distinct need in that market, some challenges that those firms were facing. And we wanted to really bring a differentiated, unique offering to the market, right? And when I started with Ascend in let's call it May of 2024, at that point it was a constellation of 6 or 7 firms around the country, and it was representing maybe pushing up to $200 million of revenue. Fast forward to, we were just at our partner kickoff a few months back, and we're 24 firms now representing over $700 million of revenue. So we've really, really grown really fast, and our focus is squarely on the middle market.
No, absolutely. And a lot of what you're saying ties into a lot of the strategic components that we're seeing within the big four and let's say the next 6, because what we're seeing is a consolidation of processes. Because when people hear, whether it's a Deloitte or KPMG or EY or BDO, whatever it might be, one of the things we've discovered working with these firms is that, yes, they're large, but when you look at business processes, they might vary team to team, function to function, whether it's the consulting arm, whether it's advisory, whether it's the assurance component, whatever it may be. And one of the key things we've seen is is there universal automation across these firms? I think one of the key problems that they all have that we've been solving is the engagement letter problem, right?
Yeah.
As you're aware of, it's something that all parts of the business do, and automating those components has been universal. But once you start digging under the surface, you start finding that ways of working aren't necessarily the same across different parts of the business. And one of the things we've been helping CIOs and leaders with is, okay, great, what is best practice? When there's 15 different practices and you're talking about AI, and one of the key things we've seen around agentic AI has been that prior to being able to deploy that, you do have to have, let's say, a source of truth when it comes to process, because you can't deploy an agent in a world with disaggregated data. So how do you tackle that piece? And what we've been seeing, it's about ultimately tackling many of those small teams, understanding what those processes are, automating it, and then ultimately providing an ROI. And so oftentimes when people think about large consulting or audit firms or accounting, they think it's a monolith. It's absolutely not. It's I don't know what you've been observing in the market in those cases about have you been seeing are firms operating similarly? Is it very different?
Yeah.
How have you been seeing it?
It's a good question. And actually, let me take a second to explain. I've talked a bit about Ascend and this independence model in the middle market, but actually some of the themes that are driving our reason for being. And I think that kind of trickles down into some of the nuances that you're talking about, what are the challenges that our firms are facing and how are we solving that? So, our founders looked at the accounting market and they saw a few distinct challenges. First was there's this massive succession problem on the horizon. So something like 75% of CPAs are baby boomers that are on the verge of retirement. And the traditional partner model is that you sell your shares to the next in line. You might have your 35, 40-year-old senior managers that are next up, and they're buying into that model. So ultimately, like, you need a succession plan. You need to be able to sell your partner shares down to the next generation of leaders and so on. So you actually have this issue where, because of that demographic composition, in a lot of firms, there's no one else there's not a next generation of leaders to sell those shares to, right? So firms that want to remain independent are having big challenges actually finding a path to doing that. And then on the flip side, for the next generation of leaders, like, the old partnership model is that you monetize your shares at something like, let's call it 3x compensation. And a lot of that's paid out in the future, right? You retire and you get that payment down the road. So you're discounting that value back to the present. And that's just not as attractive to the current financial needs of our generation, right? So succession was one. The second thing we saw was massive people challenges. So you can pull up any sort of like AI CPA or thought leadership headline, and you see constant headlines about people and talent shortages. So there's fewer people that are studying accounting. There's fewer people that are sitting for the CPA exam. There's hundreds of thousands of CPAs that have just left the profession over the past, 5-6 years. And it's not like the market is going away, right? The market for accounting at large is continuing to grow and grow. And our team did some work and projections on this. And like, if you look 10 years in the future, like 90% of people are going to have 10 years or less of experience, right?
Mm.
So that's just a massive talent problem. And a lot of these independent firms don't have a solution for that. And then you throw on top of that what you've already been talking about, which is AI and technology. Technology is a huge burden on a regional firm, right? If you're a 50-person firm, to have someone managing cybersecurity and technology in-house, you're dealing with super sensitive client information. Like, the cost of a data breach is massive, and it's really hard for firms to manage that. And then you layer in AI, this broad AI into the conversation, and the investments required of firms to make over the next 5 years to stay ahead of the game there is going to be millions of dollars. So now partners are having to do capital calls to actually invest in that technology. So we looked at those things and said, hey, something's going to break, right? So our reason for being was, we want to create a modern accounting platform that solves those things, and to pick those off one by one. So on the succession piece, firms that join Ascend, they are trading in shares of their firm for equity in Ascend more broadly, right? So you think about, instead of this old model where you have to wait till you get to partner and you buy your shares and you monetize them when you retire, like, we are equitizing people earlier in their careers, and those shares are going to compound over time. So it's just, you draw that out over a 15, 20-year career, and like, there's a massive difference in the wealth creation that you can create there. So that both creates better opportunity for the future generation of leaders, but also like helps solve that succession problem. On the people side of things, right? All those estimates say that in the next 10 years, accountants are going to have to do nearly 3 times as much work per person, right? Accountants don't want to work 3 times as much as they are today, right? People are doing 80, 90, 100 hours during tax season. Like, that's not going to work. So we think about things like global workforces, right? So from Ascend, we've got a captive global operation in India called Sentient Solutions. Like, we own the delivery, we own the training, like, it's an end-to-end solution for our firm. So what we're finding is that the value proposition there is, hey, we got a plug and play option for you. The quality is going to be, shoulders above what you can go out and get yourself. And by the way, we have a centralized recruiting team that's going to help you go find people in your market. And then you go into the third bucket around technology and AI. Like, part of the advantage of our model is that we have centralized shared services. So we have a CIO and a technology team that are thinking around the clock about cybersecurity, building a scalable platform for our firms. And we're already massively investing in AI. Like, we're super bullish on AI. We have hired a chief product officer and a team to build out products for our firms. And you put all those things together, and that's just a really compelling value proposition to firms in the middle market. And we're seeing a lot of traction. Like I said, we're now 25 platforms and growing. And the key differentiator for us is that we enable our firms to retain independence in their markets, right? In the past, traditionally, M&A would be a merge up, right? You sell your firm to the firm across the street, you take their name, you roll up the clients, you kind of serve as more of a monolith. And the firms we partner with take a ton of pride in the firms that they've built in their community, the clients they're servicing. And what we enable them to do is continue to operate independently in their markets, but have the resources of like a big four firm, right? So that's the model that we're building. And we have a ton of conviction that it's going to be successful. And we're the pace of growth has been it's been a fun ride for me personally.
No, absolutely, man. And I think some of the observations you're having are similar to what we're seeing in the market at some of the larger firms, is that one of the core goals is how do you leverage technology, e.g. AI, in order to drive more efficiency? Because there's this big hypothesis that if you don't start now, that you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage later. So the first layer we've been seeing is, okay, how do you put AI in the hands of a million auditors slash consultant slash professional services folks? And I think the early discoveries has been, one, it's really hard, especially because of what you talked about, which is the security component. You're having extremely sensitive conversations. You're having conversations that might move markets. And even within those firms, it's a bit different depending on the group, right? If you're looking at tax and audit, they're a little bit more gun shy about applying AI in those cases because of the need for, I'd say, extreme accuracy. Like you're being paid for it to be absolutely right. And you're seeing on the advisory side a little bit more room because, oftentimes what's happening is you're taking information, you're applying it to the facts of the case, you're providing a recommendation in which LLMs are a bit stronger when it comes to those specific components. Where we often step in is that 20%, I would say, that a lot of organizations are relying on, let's say, whether it's the ChatGPT app or Claude. And what's great about those applications, they're really good at getting to the 80%. Where we tend to step in is where all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, this last 20% for content creation is extremely hard. So for example, most organizations aren't going to necessarily trust an LLM to put together an audit report at this point. So one of the key ways that we're able to actually help these organizations is by saying, okay, great, what parts of this document can be AI versus what parts need to be rules-based? And it's a combination, that orchestration between the underlying model and the final content creation. And thus, we're eliminating a lot of manual document work. While from a market forces perspective, these firms are making these big announcements around AI and the clients are seeing that and they're like, wait a second, why is my bill not going down? And so it's a question of, is there value add from, in essence, providing solutions that are backed by AI? Like, are there more interactive audit reports? Can they question the outcomes? Can they, in essence, instead of getting a big stack of documents, which are mandatory, and part of the reason we exist, which is like, hey, there's mandatory content creation in all of these particular firms, to how do I provide additional value to the companies we're working with? And then there comes down to this component around like, wait a second, if you have 30% less staffing for a specific project, shouldn't we see a savings as the purchaser of the services? And in that case, you need to fill that vacuum with additional value. And so really it's this balancing act between, great, we're getting additional productivity, pressure on fees. And one thing you said that I hadn't even thought about is, more accountants, right? And the data is showing, and the numbers are showing that there's going to be fewer that are coming out in industry. So super, super interesting point. One additional key point to make is that you've seen, at this point, like a pile and pile of companies that are trying to leverage AI in the professional services space.
Totally.
And one of the big challenges that they're starting to run into is they aren't a monolith. That document processes, especially when you're dealing with a firm with 150 separate entities, if not more, the processes vary. And so one of the big challenges CIOs have been facing is, yes, we can essentially distribute, like, let's say a ChatGPT or a Claude to everyone or a Copilot, but they start hitting that 80-20 all over the place. It's not just a monolith 80-20. It's an 80-20 within this consulting specific group, within this specific tax group. And so there's going to be room for either you're going to have to build it yourself, or there's going to be room for, I don't want to call point solutions, expert solutions that are specifically designed for the problem at hand. So it's a big complex problem, and there isn't a magic bullet or a magic provider. And really where we're coming in is just helping organizations travel that last mile in order to actually drive that additional efficiency.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And something pulling on a thread that you started pulling is the complexity of the technology environments in these firms. I mean, I want to say across our 25 or some odd platform firms that we have across the Ascend family here in the US, there's hundreds of software products that our teams are using, right? And like our model is that, hey, we want you to continue to operate independently. So we don't dictate all the solutions that our firms are using. I mean, we have centralized the things that are scalable, right? Like we have an AVD environment that we've built internally, and we maintain all the applications, but firms use different things, right? I mean, there's like CCH, you've got Thomson Reuters for tax, like UltraTax. There's all these different solutions out there. So it is, I think it's easy to think that there's just that Staples easy button, like, cool, drop AI into a firm and it's going to work. And the reality is that every firm is different. Every firm has workflows set up differently, and the data is different. So I think what you're highlighting is so true, that across firms of all sizes, whether you're talking about a big four firm, whether you're talking about a regional firm like the firms we're partnered with, it's a complex environment, and there's no single silver bullet in terms of process. And I think that is, to your point, for these companies that are out there going after this market, there's a lot of complexity there, because the implementation itself, I can imagine, can start getting hairy and time consuming.
Absolutely. And I think you hit a fantastic point. It's everything demos well, but the question is, does it work?
Totally.
And yeah, that's the huge one. And I think one of the key things that we've seen in the environment, like whether it's a large audit firm or medium size or small, it's having a great understanding of process flows. Like how does work actually happen? And a lot of these firms, like there hasn't been a history of truly recording exactly, as they say, how the sausage is made. Like they don't have the information. So when you hand over a agentic solution to the CIO, there's also this weird knowledge gap that happens. I mean, one of the biggest things we've seen is this conflict between the providers, right? The managing partners, the people that are actually delivering solutions, and IT. Because IT oftentimes does not have a deep understanding of exactly what is happening during an audit, during a consulting project, during a tax engagement. And so what you're seeing is all of these point solutions, they have their SERs, they have their BD, they're reaching out to everyone. And then it gets to the part of implementation. It then becomes a challenge because these organizations need to come to a decision on what good looks like. And so it's not just about capabilities, it's how are you as a software vendor or solution provider able to fit into the core process that they have? How are you helping them? How are you advising them? Because they absolutely do need advice. Because one of the key things I've seen is that you go into the firms, there's a big penchant to try to build themselves. And oftentimes in that process, I'm like, ooh, have you taken into consideration the core flow? Have you taken into consideration the maintenance? Have you taken into consideration that process might change? And so there's this big instinct now to, partner with, one of the core LLM providers out there. At the end, there's two, right, that are running it in the US. It's OpenAI or Anthropic.
Sure.
And what I've seen is that there's right now, for the current moment, an instinct to run to safety, which is like, hey, if we work with the big LLMs, we work on a project, then we'll be able to get an outcome. And I'm like, well, this is your first time doing it. This is our 30th time doing it. And it does help to have expert tools in those cases. So it's a very interesting time where this internal conflict is real. And within even some of these firms, there might be 5 distinct CTOs, CIOs for each practice area, a chief digital officer, about 15 chiefs that all potentially have a different opinion on what good looks like. And then you have the partners where there's around 20 of them that have a whole different opinion on what that looks like. And if you're going into these organizations trying to push your solution, it's about people. Like, it's making sure you have the right stakeholders and people that can actually make decisions on what a good process looks like in those cases.
And by the way, those partners you're alluding to, at the end of the day, they're the ones signing off on those audit reports or the tax return, right? So the liability's on them. So when we talk about these AI solutions, like, it is critically important that the quality is right and they're comfortable signing those papers, right? Because they're the ones that's liable.
I think that's a huge call out. I think it's the same thing in law. Like, I'm a lawyer by training, right? And we have these rules of professional conduct. And ultimately, when something goes wrong, it's on your license. And so I think that right now you have AI as an assistant, but we keep talking about agentic AI taking over full workflows. But the liability is still going to rest with the partner, with the lawyer that's actually signing off on it. And I think that's one part that you don't hear enough about. Like, it's really about the agents will do X, Y, Z. I'm like, well, are you willing to put your license on the line on those components without necessarily having the tooling for the quality checks? But in coding, you have agents checking agents, but it doesn't matter if you have 5 agents checking the agent. Ultimately, your license is the license that's on the line, which is why, especially in cases where it's deeply sensitive, we might even get into rules-based automation. We're like, look, it's deterministic. Like, if you click these buttons, ABC shall happen. And oftentimes when we deploy a solution, especially for engagement letters or audit reports, there is what you see is kind of like this balance. Like, how much AI is it? How much rules-based it is in those bits? But at the same time, there's this weird downward pressure from, I'd say, boards and senior partner. Like, how much AI is it? I'm like, well, you need AI, but 20% AI. You don't want to be out there all AIing it. You don't want to go full AI, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really interesting strategic question for firms right now, because, as we've talked about earlier, the people shortage and the talent shortage, AI is not just a nice to have, it's a requirement. We talked, you got to get three times more productive. How do we do that? I mean, AI and technology is a part of how we enable our people to be more productive. So it's really, it's a critical solve for us to be able to serve the growing market that's going to exist in the next 5 to 10 years. And we've really been thinking about it through the lens of a few different lenses. Like, first and foremost, the client back view, right? I mean, we view the solutions that we're investing in about how do we create better client experiences, right? Because we're in a client service business at the end of the day. So we want to be providing the best experience. We want to be trusted advisors to our clients. And how do we create tools that enable that to happen? Like, I mean, you think about 5-10 years ago, you might have to scan your W-2 and email it, and then you get some stuff in the mail, and then you send it to your accountant, and it's not an amazing experience, right? It's a lot of manual processes. So it's like, hey, can we actually leverage agentic AI to actually help with some of that document collection and gathering and processing, right? And that creates a better experience for the clients, which is super cool. So we've been I personally have been thinking a lot about, like, how do we create amazing experiences for our clients with AI tooling. And then obviously the productivity piece, again, it's critical based on the demographics and the numbers. So as you talked about, there's a lot of point solutions out there. I mean, we're getting calls nonstop from a company called Field Guide that's doing stuff in the realm of audit, and there's a solution that some of our firms called Audit that does like employee benefit plan audit. So you're definitely seeing technology companies target really specific workflows and use cases. And I think, to your point, the devil really is in the details on this stuff, because like every different audits in different industries are going to have different processes and procedures and testing, and like, so there's really value in that kind of almost like vertical oriented solutioning. And the cool thing about our Ascend network, right, is that we have these 25 platforms across the US. They're all building and testing different things. We're able to share back, hey, like what's really working for you? What are the solutions that are working well? So we get some benefits of scale there. And then back to my original point on the succession piece, like all of our firms are owners in Ascend Equity. So like a firm across the country being successful, winning a new client is driving equity value for the entire platform, right? So like we have a vested interest in enabling each other to be successful. And that's everything from client interactions to information sharing to like, how do we get AI right? And the next thing the final thing I'll say on the AI side of things is like the importance of data. You know, there's this Frank Slootman, I think, is famous for saying, I might not be getting this exactly right, but you don't have an AI strategy if you don't have a data strategy. And as we've talked about, the technology environments in accounting firms are complex, right? There's a lot of different tools and systems, and a lot of them are legacy tools that frankly don't have amazing structures and aren't super user friendly. So like, it's really important. Again, you think about, hey, we're just going to drag and drop AI into a firm. It's like, that's not going to work because the data might be in 6 different systems. And like, how do you stitch that together in a way that's workable and effective? And that's, you know, again, that's for us at Ascend-wide, like that's been a priority for us, is like, how do we create a really good data strategy to like inform some of the proprietary products we're building. And like, can't get in the super specifics of what we're building. But what I'll say is like, you know, we're really built needing stuff in partnership with our firms. And like, we've started forward deploying some solutions into firms and seeing some good results. So we're super bullish on AI. But again, it gets back to, you think about that $30 million firm, right? That local firm. All the stuff we're talking about is like massive time, massive investment, and it's really hard to do by yourself. So I think you're going to see that kind of continued consolidation to face off some of these headwinds. But I mean, broadly, you know, I think the market at large is super bullish on AI in the context of professional services. And I mean, I feel like every other day there's like a headline about, you know, how it's putting all the white collar workers out of work. And the reality is like, it's going to enable our people to be that much more productive, right? And really focus more of their time on client service and being that trusted advisor. So I personally have a ton of excitement about what the world of work is going to look like for our staff in the next, 5-10 years.
No, absolutely. It's a super exciting time at Templafy and a super exciting time within large audit firms, because I think the drudgery is being taken out. That's the first component. It's this, and if you think about it, at least within a Templafy context, oftentimes a lot of the calculations have been done, a lot of the audit work has been done, the interviews have been done. And really, some of the tough parts are actually putting together the final output. And so one of the key areas we've focused on, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, was quality of life, right? Organizations that have Templafy, their actual employees, their life is better because they actually have a solution that can eliminate moving boxes around in PowerPoint or injecting a very specific piece of text on page 27, 5 paragraphs down. So instead of doing a lot of that work, what they're doing is thinking strategically, adding client value. And so a lot of the ROI we've seen for organizations, yes, there's a time savings. Yes, there's higher conversion rates because essentially, all ships rise with rising tides. And so even somebody who wasn't good at creating a presentation, now they can create something that's nearly perfect, that's exactly on brand. And one of the key things that we've been focused on is meeting people where they work. And the reason you have to do that is it's incredibly hard to manage change when you're asking people to work completely different from what they were doing before. So some of the things we're doing is essentially MCP, So if they're in their chat interface, whether it's home built or whether it's directly in Claude or whether it's in OpenAI or Copilot, whatever it is, we're like, fantastic. You need to create a document? Great, start there. Traditionally, over the past 10 years, the starting point used to be in M365, right? Like you're directly in PowerPoint, you're going into your SharePoint, you're going through your emails, you're kind of bouncing around. You're even emailing your neighbor.
Yeah.
You're there essentially bouncing around different data sources. And one of the things we've seen is how do you allow someone to be done at 9 p.m. instead of 11 p.m. And it does actually increase longevity of individuals within the industry, especially if you're looking at a world where there's fewer and fewer qualified accountants. It's making the role more essentially attractive to people. It's giving them back time. It's adding client value. And so one of the big observations we've had, especially with some of our customers and the ROI components, it's always easy to measure time savings. But what about the components that increase quality of life for employees? And even one scenario, what we do is we don't just create the presentation, we call out every part that was AI. Why is that important? Because it reduces the review burden. So it's a huge difference between something that was relatively structured and 80% of it is essentially pulling from the database directly where it's supposed to, and getting the call outs. This is where AI was specifically used within that document, thus reducing the mental load on everyone that's working on that particular document. So we often think about the quality of life of our users and the quality of life of our administrators. So it's a really big deal to whatever solution you have fits into the workflow that folks have. And when I look forward, when I look at attorneys, like, I hate to say this, part of the reason that I stopped being an attorney was because it was extreme minutia at all times. It is the minutia of minutia jobs. And I think maybe had there been AI at the time, right, in order to take out some of the drudgery, I might have been a lawyer to this day. But I think one of the key challenges was always that everything was in the extreme details, even if it was pro forma. And so I think we're actually moving into a world where it's going to be more brain work and less drudgery while still maintaining the quality that's always been available.
You give me a slight nightmare to my McKinsey days when a partner would be like, those numbers don't add up to the total. So you get the wrong direction of rounding. Ooh. It's like, oh, that's 11.1, not 11. That aside, the comment on the people and quality of life resonates a ton. I mean, that's our capital backer, Alpine Investors, their whole ethos is people first, private equity, right? And the belief is that, hey, if you create an amazing place for people to work where they're happy, fulfilled across all the dimensions, both personally and professionally, that business is going to do really well. Like that business is going to succeed if you have great people doing great work. So that 100% resonates. And we're thinking about the same things, right? I mean, we, during tax season, you hear people are working 80, 90 hours and like, that's not sustainable. And we talk back to the demographic shift, and that's why people have left the industry, because they're like, I'm tired of getting slammed. Why would I go work 90 hours when I can take a job that gives me more balance and sustainability of life? So we definitely see the technology that we can bring to our staff in the way that you at Templafy are bringing that product to your clients. Like the technology that we're building for our staff in the same vein is like, how do we enable them to focus on the highest value activities, the client service, the advisory, and actually give them better quality of life, give them that more sustainable life, because we want people to have long, prosperous careers and not get burned out.
Absolutely. And that's hugely important. It's, when we talk about transformation, it's always been people first, process, then technology. And so it happens to be PPT by a circumstance PowerPoint, but again, inside document joke. Oh. I'm at the document jokes now. And one of the key components we've seen is how do you provide the picks and shovels for the internal experts within these organizations. At least for the orgs that we tend to work with, they do have big engineering teams, they do have big IT teams, they do have the resources internally, but oftentimes they're relying on general tools and not tools specifically designed for the actual problem at hand. And so what we try to do, at least for organizations that have, CIOs, thousands of folks, is instead of saying, here's a ready-made solution, we're like, fantastic, here's how we save the CIO time. So really what we're about is making sure that we decrease the amount of effort, both for the internal builders and for the end users. And it's allowing organizations to use whatever parts of Templafy that might add value in those cases, fully acknowledging that processes are complex, data housing is complex, and the problems they're trying to solve, even within an organization that appears externally to be a monolith, are not. And so I think what's really cool is that these firms are actually at the forefront of AI. They're really trying to make it work. And oftentimes what I've observed, and I know if you've seen the same, that they're most successful when they tackle very well-defined problems within a subset of the population instead of having a monolith solution that's supposed to solve everything. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, it's really cool again, your perspective of having clients in a different segment of the market. There's a lot of parallels in terms of the challenges that we're seeing and facing. And I think the process orientation point is spot on, right? It's like, hey, we're going to make a AI tax solution. Well, there's a lot of different types of tax returns, right? Are we talking about an individual's tax return? Are we talking about their, a trust tax return? Are we talking about like a multi-state, multi-entity complex business? And all those things have different needs and nuances that like you truly can't just build a tax bot, right? I mean, that's just not something that's going to be successful. So I think that your point around like sitting down and thinking, being thoughtful about what are the different process steps in the different tasks that we're doing and what can be automated. And then also importantly, like what from a sort of risk management regulatory perspective can we automate, right? Because there's going to be certain parts of the process where like that mistake is critical. And then if the person signs that audit report, like there's a lot on the line there. So, we're trying to be thoughtful about that as well in terms of like, how do we be really targeted and specific about how we think about coming up with solutions to challenges that are, different professionals and service lines are facing.
And that's awesome, Chris. And with that, definitely appreciate you coming in, having this conversation with me about the exciting world of AI and accounting and audit and consulting, because I absolutely think that the next $1 trillion companies are going to be those that ultimately are, it's not disguised, but they're technology firms that are ultimately providing services, which is ultimately a space where oftentimes these large providers, they have an edge right now, right? They have the resources, they have the budgets, they have the people, and they're ultimately going to have a huge edge there when you fast forward 10 years. But I'll give you the last word.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a really interesting discussion. And again, it's cool to connect the dots between two different parts of the market and you sit actually as a technology company and we are an accounting firm, right? We in some ways are evolving into a elements of a technology company. But I agree with you. I think coming from my previous gig working in video games to accounting, that's about as big of a 180 turn as I think you can possibly make. But I just have a ton of excitement about what's on the horizon for the next 5 to 10 years. I think the application of AI and technology to the problems that we're solving, the possibilities are just endless. And I think actually fundamentally, accounting firms are going to look and operate so much differently in 10 years. And that all even comes back to the talent question, right? Like, what does the future of work look like? And how do we actually train and develop our people in a way that sets them up for success? So I think there's some big thorny problems still to address, but it's just fun to be on the foreground of tackling those with our people.
All right. Thanks, my man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.